You've heard the flood story 100 times. The world got sinful, so God wiped it clean. But Genesis 6 says something most churches skip entirely. The actual text describes divine beings, not humans, breaching heaven. And that changes everything about why the flood happened. Most explanations collapse when you read what text says. They focus on general corruption and miss cosmic violation. What if the flood wasn't just about human sin? What if it was God's response to shattered boundary? This matters because Genesis 6 reveals fundamentally different world. When you read Genesis 6 slowly, first thing jumps. It's not description of sinful humanity, it's divine beings. The text says, sons of God saw daughters beautiful. They married any of them they chose without restriction. That phrase, sons of God, appears nowhere else in Genesis. In Hebrew, bene elohim means divine beings, not humans. It's the same term used in Job for angels. It's never used for human descendants, no matter how righteous. But your pastor probably told you this meant Seth's descendants. That's not what the text says at all, friend. When Second Temple Jews read Genesis 6, they saw rebellion. The Book of Enoch, written during that period, describes this. The Watchers, divine beings descended to earth, took human wives. They taught forbidden knowledge, metalwork, weapons, cosmetics, technologies that corrupted. Their offspring were the Nephilim, the giants who became warriors. But the text calls them Gibborim, violent men, not tall. Here's what most people miss. Genesis 6 describes two events. First, sons of God breach boundary and corrupt humanity. Then humanity descends into total violence across the earth. Verse 3 shows God's response to the divine breach clearly. My spirit will not contend with humans forever. He says, their days will be 120 years maximum. That's not random number. It's God setting limit on corruption. Humanity, already compromised by divine transgression, will now face judgment. Then the text pivots. The earth was filled with violence. By this point, humanity has developed civilization hierarchy, warfare over centuries. Genesis 5 gives you 10 generations from Adam to Noah, roughly 1656 years by the time Noah builds the ark. By Noah's time, humanity wasn't primitive, they were organized and violent. The Nephilim appear before the general corruption is even mentioned. This isn't accidental, it's the cause of what follows next. In ancient Near Eastern thought, heaven and earth were separate. Divine beings staying in heaven, humans staying on earth was order. When sons of God violated that boundary, they didn't break rule. They fractured creation itself at the foundation of reality. This is why God grieved. Genesis 6 says, heart deeply troubled. It wasn't just that humans sinned, it was structure violated. The flood wasn't punishment for ordinary moral failure at all. It was cosmic restoration, way to cleanse earth of deep violation. And here's what this reveals about your world right now. Divine and human realms are still separated by design always. That boundary still matters, even though flood seems ancient history. When you feel tempted to cross lines, spiritual, moral, relational boundaries, you're wrestling with the same boundary issue, not as dramatically. The ancient Hebrews understood Genesis 6 as warning about order. Crossing what shouldn't be crossed always ends in destruction, friend. Your integrity isn't arbitrary. Boundaries aren't meant to limit you. They're meant to protect the order that makes life livable. Genesis 6 is about beings who had power. They shouldn't. They used it. Everything fell apart because of that choice. The pre-flood world wasn't just sinful. It was corrupted at foundation. That's different. That's existential. That's why flood was necessary response. But there's something else here that changes how you read. Notice that God didn't destroy the world arbitrarily. He warned first. Genesis 6, their days will be 120 years, was deadline. Humanity had over a century to turn to resist corruption. They didn't. They chose corruption anyway, despite the warning given. By the time Noah was building the ark, everyone knew they'd had 120 years of warning, and they chose corruption. That's the part that haunts this story. God didn't act. He acted in response to chosen persistent violation of his design. And the flood was proportional. It wasn't excessive at all. It was the only response that could restore what was shattered. When you read Genesis 6 this way, you stop seeing mythology. You see it as something that still teaches how creation works. Your life has boundaries too, spiritual boundaries, relational ones, moral ones. They're not there to punish you, they're there to protect order. The pre-flood world teaches you that crossing them costs more, and choosing to honor them, even when you don't understand, matters. The Nephilim were mighty men. They were renowned. They had power, and their world drowned because they violated sacred order of creation. Your power isn't measured by how many boundaries you cross. It's measured by your integrity within them. That's real strength. That's what Genesis 6 actually says. Not just people were bad. The world before the flood reveals what happens when you violate. The sacred architecture of reality itself always ends in destruction, friend.